actually are. They are prescription medication prescribed by doctors to treat patients' extreme or persistent pain. Opioids can be used for chronic pain, for example, head and back ache, cancer-related pain, and recovering from surgery. Opioids can be very effective and helpful for the patient's pain, but at the same time, they can be highly addictive. The whole opioid epidemic started in the late 1990s in the United States when pharmaceutical companies declared that opioids would not be addictive. That led to healthcare providers to start prescribe opioids more frequently, and the issue started to spread wider.
The opioid crisis came along with many issues. On a small scale, we'll use the users and their loved ones. Evidently, for the users, an overdose is always at risk. To follow, they have problems keeping their employment, which leads them into bad mental health. This bad mental health usually results in them being driven farther into addiction. On a larger scale, there is also more gang presence. This gang presence is due to the drug trafficking of these opioids. Not only are they selling the pure content, but they are also mixing the drugs of opioids with other drugs and then selling them as if they were normal opioids. As this is a large increase in money, there is lots of violence between the gangs for territory and selling property. The social issue is also an economical burden due to its bills related to opioid use in the health field. In the United States alone, $78.5 billion have been dispensed on health issues related to the opioid use. Another large problem with the issue is the transfer from eating pills to injecting needles. When you inject the drug directly into the bloodstream, it's a much more potent way to do it, rather than taking the pills. Also, many of these addicts are deciding to share needles, which is also contributing to the spread of disease. Rather than throwing them in containers, which are safe, these users are either throwing them on the ground, which is littering, or you're throwing them in the garbage, where workers then get poked and possibly contaminate themselves. There have been many previous efforts contributing towards the opioid crisis. One of these consists of Naxaline kits, which is a temporary reverse kit for overdoses on opioids, such as morphine, heroin, methadone, and fentanyl. There are two types of kits, the injectable kit as well as a nasal spray kit, which are both free. And the name of the actual drug being used is Narcan. There are also safe injection sites, where the users can be injected by a medical professional rather than their friends or themselves. This site decreases the sharing of needles and overdoses, as well as increases the proper disposal of the needles.
There are many potential strengths in this case. The overall knowledge and research on opioid crisis and information collected to spread, and then by that prevent the younger generation from drug abuse. New and innovative way to engage with the younger generation and then achieve a healthier, happier society by fighting against the opioid crisis. This campaign has a clear target market and plans to work towards. Statistics and ways to measure the success of it during the campaign and afterwards to see how it went and what needs to be even more improved in the future. In addition, there are also resources and willingness to fight and work on to control the impact of the opioid crisis in the society, and especially when it comes to the young generation.
The weaknesses of the opioid crisis are the causes that it is making, which is loss of working force, friends, family, and life, which means that the families will suffer from the causes from this crisis. and it affects the whole well-being of the society and makes an unhealthy and dangerous living environment to children. Also, weaknesses can be the lack of power to reach everyone needed and having not enough resources.
One of many opportunities is approaching the younger generation, as they have probably not been introduced to those kind of drugs yet. Another great opportunity for the campaign is the agreement of society, as many believe that opioid use is a stain on society, it looks bad on store brands, and it's definitely not good for small businesses.
Some potential threats include police forces putting more time into the opioid crisis, which could lead to an increase in other types of crime. Rehab facility costs could also be seen as a threat because certain cities might want to look to use their available funds elsewhere. Lastly, a Crime Stoppers-esque hotline could potentially put innocent people in jail, but significant evidence would have to be found for someone to be convicted.
The overall goal of the campaign is to increase awareness, safety, and knowledge around the use of opioids, as well as end the stigma.
So as target market, we chose younger generation who are not affected by opioids yet. Children are easier to reach, educate, and convince about the dangers of opioids than the people who are already addicted to opioids and might live, for example, on the streets. And by younger generation, we mean children in the elementary school and junior high.
Youth programs. One potential idea is to focus more on the younger generation and improve their perception when it comes to opioid crisis and drug abuse in general. Children absorb any kinds of behaviors and paradigms from their living environment, so it's very important to create a way to perform and educate them with this kind of serious and important subject as the opioid crisis and drug abuse in general is, as a preventive function. There should be a program which includes performance that are suitable for young children. This kind of program should be involved into education process, and also families would be informed and conduct how to educate their kids with this kind of subject and guide parents how to speak about it in an appropriate way with their kids. Then what comes to the barriers to try, we need to create right amount of attention to our target audience. We need to become heard and taken seriously. And then what comes to the barriers to try, we need to create right amount of attention to our target audience. We need to become heard and taken seriously, and we need to educate parents who might not be willing to engage with this subject first. And then costs. Of course, those expenses for organized educating and gatherings, time-wise, and the continuance that we really make this work and we really help the change to happen. Benefit that we got from here, from these youth programs, would be effective way to educate families and so prevent possibility for the younger generation to become a victim of drug abuse.
Another contribution towards the opioid crisis is having needle-safe containers. A great location for these containers would be in public washrooms, at restaurants, bus stations, corner stores, and honestly anywhere public that someone could shoot up. The product should be high visibility, and bright colors, with an obvious pictures of its use and clear directions on how to use it. I believe one of the barriers to entry for the needle-safe containers is convincing the proud restaurant and store owners to install a needle-safe box in their washroom, as it's not the number one thing that their customers would want to see. The cost for this product is pretty well inexpensive, consisting of the cost of the containers, the installation, the upkeep, and the time to get them all set up. There are some major benefits, but I'll just name a few. For this one, it's completely removing the chance of an individual or child of finding the needle in the restaurant or even getting poked by it. It also decreases the major spread of HIV and hepatitis C.
Another idea that would work well with our campaign would be the addition of more rehab centers for addicts who are trying to recover. These rehab centers could be mutually funded by the city as well as funds raised by our campaign so that more cities who are low on funds can help those in their city who are struggling with addiction. Opioid addiction is deadly because it gets to the point where the individual wants to stop, but their body won't allow it. Withdrawals from opioids are so severe that they can cause seizures and high blood pressure. It gets to the point where users are only consuming these drugs to survive, which has led to a major crisis in North America. These addictions occur once the body stops releasing endorphins. This causes the recommended dosage to lose its effects, which makes the individual feel like they need to take more. A quote from the Mayo Clinic's staff suggests, because doctors today are acutely aware of opioid risks, it's often difficult to get your doctor to increase your dose or even renew your prescription. Some opioid users who believe they need an increased supply turn at this point to illegally obtain opioids or heroin. Some illegally obtained drugs, such as fentanyl, are laced with contaminants of much more powerful opioids. Because of the potency of fentanyl, this particular combination has been associated with a significant number of deaths in those using heroin. In addition to this, hotlines to report suspected opioid dealers would be beneficial to get more of these drugs off the street. These street drugs cause more deaths than any other prescribed opioids. That's why our campaign wants to focus on the dealers who don't care about the loss of life due to their product, but only about the profits they are making. Once the supply becomes smaller and smaller, the amount of people who become addicted to opioids every year will surely decrease. The opioid crisis in North America was brought here by money-hungry pharmaceutical companies who were aware of the addictive side effects but kept them quiet to the public. Our campaign will educate the youth on the severity of these addictions while also doing everything we can to help those who are struggling with opioid addiction. By adding needle-safe containers, these needles will be unable to find their way into the hands of children and possibly save certain adults from getting poked and contaminated. By adding these youth programs, more and more youth will know the dangers of these opioid drugs and how deadly the addiction will become. If the youth knows the dangers, they will be more likely to stay away or stick to a dosage prescribed by a doctor. Lastly, by adding rehab centers and a drug dealer reporting hotline, our campaign will be able to get those struggling with addiction help and take more of these street opioids off the street. The plan is to spread as much awareness on the issue as possible so that the next generation knows the dangers of these prescription opioids as well as the even more dangerous street opioids. This crisis started because people were not aware of the dangerous addictive side effects. The more people who know, the less will choose to use these drugs. This campaign would be deemed successful if the amount of overdoses per year in North America decreases, the amount of drug dealing related arrests rise, and finally the amount of opioid possession related arrests drop. This campaign has the potential to make a huge impact in North America because of its ability to save lives.